Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're taking on a fascinating challenge.
hmm
Trying to get our heads around a number that's just, it feels almost unknowable.
Right. We're talking about estimating Google search queries, like how many happen every single second
Yeah.
globally.
Exactly. That scale is just wild.
Yeah. And the source material we're digging into today, it lays out one specific way, one approach someone might take to figure out this massive number.
So our mission today is kind of unpacking that method, seeing the steps, the assumptions they made.
Precisely. Understanding the process behind estimating something so enormous. It's pretty interesting how they tackle it.
Okay, let's do it. Think of it like detective work, maybe, starting really broad and then narrowing it down with the clues, the data we have.
Good analogy.
Mm.
So where do you even begin with something like this?
That's the question. Where does the source start?
Well, it has to start with the absolute biggest pool, right? The total global population.
Okay.
So we're talking, what, around 7.5 billion people on the planet? That's the starting universe.
7.5 billion?
Right.
But obviously not everyone's online. Not by a long shot. And certainly not everyone uses Google. How do they start filtering that down?
Exactly. That's the next layer. First, you've got to consider who actually has internet access.
Mm,
The source puts that at roughly 70% globally. Then, within that group, you look at Google's dominance in search.
okay. It's market share, which is pretty high, but not 100%.
Right. The source estimates it's maybe around 80%.
But wait, didn't the source also make a big carve out right at the beginning for places where Google just isn't the main player or isn't really used?
Oh, yeah, good point. Absolutely. Places like China, obviously, and also considering lower usage in countries like Russia.
So they kind of pull a chunk of population out before even applying the percentages.
Correct. The source suggests just removing, effectively, about 1.5 billion people from the calculation right up front because of that.
Okay, makes sense. So 7.5 billion minus that 1.5 billion.
Leaves you with 6 billion. Then you apply the 70% internet access to that number.
Right.
And then the 80% Google market share to that result.
Following that logic, where does it land us in terms of active Google users?
According to the source's calculation path, you end up with an estimated pool of around 3 billion active Google search users worldwide. That's the group we're really focusing on.
Okay, 3 billion users. Still a huge number. Now, this is where it gets tricky, I imagine. How do you go from users to searches, especially per day? People search so differently.
This is probably the biggest leap, yeah. It involves a pretty significant assumption about behavior. The source uses a version of the 80-20 rule.
Ah, the Pareto principle. Like 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes.
Exactly that principle. They apply it here, suggesting that, roughly 80% of the searches probably come from the most active 20% of those users.
Okay, so they focus on the power users, so to speak.
Sort of. They estimate that this top 20% of the 3 billion users, that 600 million people, are the really active ones.
And how active are they? Did the source guess how many searches they do?
Yeah, another key assumption here. They estimated this active group averages maybe 15 to 20 searches per person per day.
Gotcha. So take that 20%, 600 million users, multiply by, say, 15 searches a day. That's already a massive number of searches.
It really is. That calculation alone gets you to roughly 9 billion searches per day, just from that top 20%.
Wow. Okay. And then using the 80-20 idea again, they assume those 9 billion searches represent 80% of the total daily searches from all 3 billion users.
Yeah, that's the logic presented, yeah. So you can kind of work backwards from there. If 9 billion is 80%.
You divide 9 billion by 0.8.
Mm-hmm. And that gives you the estimated total daily searches across everyone. The source's calculation lands that somewhere around 11 to 12 billion Google searches globally per day.
11 to 12 billion every day. It's just staggering to think about.
It really is.
Okay, so that's the daily figure. The final step then is getting back to our original question, the per second number.
Right, simple division, really. You take that huge daily total, the 11 or 12 billion.
And divide by the number of seconds in a day, which is
Okay.
86,400.
Yep, 86,400 seconds. The source might have rounded slightly in their example calc, but that's the basic idea. Divide the daily total by seconds per day.
And doing that, following this whole chain of estimations and assumptions, what's the final number they reach?
This particular estimation process lands on a figure around 140,000 Google search queries per second.
140,000 every second.
Mind-boggling, isn't it? So, yeah, walking through it, population, internet access, market share, the big regional exclusion, then the 80-20 rule, plus the searches per user guess. it all leads to that 140,000 per second figure in this model.
What's so interesting, I think, isn't just the number itself, which is huge, but seeing the method, how you can even attempt to estimate something you can't possibly count directly.
Absolutely. It's all about breaking the problem down, using available data, and making assumptions, which are clearly stated here. Importantly, to build a model, it gives you a sense of scale.
It really does, and it makes you think, too. Well, it raises this question for you, listening. How much difference would it make if you just tweaked one of those assumptions?
Right. Like, what if the average active user only did 10 searches instead of 15?
Me.
Or what if that initial 1.5 billion exclusion was actually 2 billion? How much would that final 140,000 number change?
Exactly. And what does that sensitivity tell us about these kinds of estimates? They aren't exact counts, but they're valuable tools for understanding things far too vast to measure directly. Something to mull over.